Alright guys, this is developer commentary for Flow. I'm Genova Chen, creative director from that game company, and with me are John Edwards, our lead engineer.
Hello guys.
Nick Clark, our lead designer.
Hello.
And Austin Wintory, our composer for Flow.
Hello.
As the game is loading up, Flow is a very special project for us because this is the very first commercial product we've made at that game company. Flow is actually a game that we created, Nick and I created at USC together with Austin, originally as a Flash game in a browser. And that game has gathered a lot of hits on the internet. There's almost 300,000 clicks in the first week we launched the game. That's how we get the notice by Sony. At the time was John Haidt, who's the head of the external development, with George Wyson and Rusty Butcher. And they were the one who brought us in to Sony and started that game company. And this is the very origin of that game company.
So initially this was supposed to be a launch title for the PS3, but we went way over schedule and ended up launching.
We had
February.
no idea what we were doing.
All right, so let's start.
How are the controls, Nick? As good as you remember?
Better. Better than
All right.
It's really fun to do a side-by-side comparison, though, of this with the Flash version. Because I remember the Flash version being really cool. And then you compare it to this, and you're like, wow, it's horrible. Like, it's just so... it's conceptually there, but very unpretty by comparison. You guys did an awesome job.
What were we trying to do with this game?
So the original Flash version had one creature, which was this guy, and then we had just started a second campaign, which was the jellyfish, as we called it. But it was pretty buggy, and so we wanted to expand upon that, add a whole host of new creatures. The initial design, I think we wanted like 7 or 8 playable creatures, but because we were
garbage collector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we were way over scoped on the project, so we had to cut that in half, and still ended up taking twice the initial time we estimated.
We maintained the bugginess pretty well from the Flash version, though.
Yeah, there's some interesting screenshots of.
We might catch a few.
We might recreate some.
So the original Flow game in the Flash was not actually started as a game. I was doing some grad school studies, trying to figure out whether we have a way to design a game to make it to be somewhat adaptive to the player's skill and their background knowledge about gaming. At the time, we finished a student game called Cloud, which had a lot of problem with people who never played games. They were having trouble to play the student game we made. So I did a lot of research, and many people, advisors from school and industry, recommend me to read this book called Flow, the psychology theory, the psychology of optimal experience. It turns out there's this psychological theory called Flow theory, and it's written by this professor at University of Chicago. His name is Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. He originally came from Hungarian. At the time, psychology has been mainly dealing with, the negative side of human psyche, why certain guy goes crazy, But he was the first person who looked into the psychology behind the positive emotions of human being. What makes people focus, what makes people happy, and what makes people be creative. And in his research, he realized that there's this interesting dynamics between any activity human engage. There's always some kind of skill and challenge. So if you are a very good, let's say, game player, and you're playing a game that's very easy, it's very likely you would just be bored and you want to stop playing. Or if you're someone who haven't played a lot of game and engaging in a very hardcore competitive game, you will feel anxiety and you just feel this is too frustrating and you give up playing the game. So in order to make people engage in the game and continue experiencing it, you need to reach a fine balance between the challenge the game presents and the ability the player have. And so for Flow, we're trying out a very simple idea, which is in the game there are these blue and red creatures that can change the altitude or the depths your creature are in the world. So if you eat the blue food, it actually takes you to shallower water, so it's kind of safe. But if you want a challenge, you want to eat the red one, which lets you dive deeper into the ocean. There will be, other creatures that present as a big challenge for you. But the key is the player has full control over the amount of challenge they want to engage in. So, for example, if we want to if we're a very good player like Nick is doing, he's by the way, he's driving the game here. We could just keep diving down without really kind of eating any food, and just continue going to a deeper and deeper area, as long as he is good enough to be able to confront the challenge from the other creatures. But for someone who are new, they would probably spend more time to in the upper level so that they can grow up their body and just adjust the amount of challenge coming up later. So that's basically the game, and we made that experience on the browser, and many people played it. And when Sony wanted us to turn this into a commercial game, there's actually quite a lot more things we want to add to make it really justify to be a game. In the early stage, there's a lot of ideas about what we want to add to the game beyond the original Flash game. I guess you guys can talk about it, though. What it's like at the beginning of this PS3 project.
Yeah, well, we had a lot of ideas.
We did have a lot of ideas. I think, all I remember is we were very overwhelmed with development on the PS3 and figuring out how to, because this, like Genova mentioned, was our first commercial product.
It was also before the PS3
before it even
had
launched.
come out, yeah.
we
So
were
it was new to everybody, including Sony.
I think kind of what happened is we went through this pretty substantial planning phase where we came up with all these amazing ideas, and then we got into Sony the first day to start working on the PS3, and just instantly forgot about all that and just focused on making something work for most of development. So we were just kind of scrambling to get anything we could in here, which
but I think like the variety of creatures and stuff that we were able to create is pretty good. I'm pretty proud of what we were able to accomplish.
There were definitely a few that got scrapped. That I don't think you feel that loss playing the game. It doesn't feel like this is almost done.
Right.
But there were some fun ideas that.
I remember I spent like 2 weeks, which at the time seemed like a crazy amount of time, trying to make this like hairfish or something, which I'm not sure why I ever thought that was a good idea, but yeah, I was working extensively on hair simulation.
Well,
I guess you put that to good use on the game after this.
Yeah.
We initially wanted like a custom unique boss at the end of every campaign, and we implemented one of them for the second campaign, and it's bugged, so it like never shows up. It always flees the map before you get to it.
We called him the Bullet Boss, but I think he's like just...
He's actually present in the Flash version, but he's totally bugged out in the PS3 version.
You can catch him sometimes. He's kind of like Bigfoot.
Yeah, it's a rare sighting.
Yeah.
If you get to fight the Bullet Boss.
There are whole forums dedicated to the rumors of
So, by the way, here's a little touch that I thought was pretty neat. You had a preview of what's coming next.
Right, you got these little baby creatures at the end. So the idea here is like you eat the egg of the next creature, and then it rises to the top and births into the next Nice.
So we're teaching some biology.
Okay, so now we're back at the menu here, and I've got the next creature unlocked.
So,
Alright.
yeah,
So-
Flow is actually a game supporting up to 7 players?
Whoa,
It was a
seven?
full player, and it was actually not very well discovered by our players because it's released in the early days. We didn't even really
I think it was
mention
only the expansion, or not the, what did the expansion add in terms of the multiplayer? I'm not sure.
Who made this game again?
Yeah. It's a long time. It was like 6 years later, 5 years later.
Yeah, but the multiplayer is interesting. It's mainly cooperative, depending on how you play.
You can, so if you eat there's a certain power-up that turns you red, and if you get that power-up, you can actually eat the other players.
I did
That's
not-
a very, very rude thing to do.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's like
That's
a brief,
literally the first time I've ever known
a
that.
brief moment of PvP competitiveness in Flow. And so there's actually a level in the previous campaign where that power-up spawns infinitely, so you can just kind of,
Deathmatch,
deathmatch level.
if you wish.
It's funny. My perception of this game was always everything that Genova just said about the sort of dynamic difficulty of the player's ability to kind of control their experience in a way that's more seamless and more elegant than like setting a difficulty level and things like that the way games normally traditionally did. But what I thought was so interesting about Flow is that it does that in the context of an overall kind of relaxing emotion. And that
Yeah.
like Flow at its most exciting is not supposed to be like hugely exciting, because which to me was always interesting. Like when we were starting on the Flash version at USC, Genova said, there's all these games that are about sort of stimulus and like adrenaline and excitement, and like I wonder if you can make a game that people would want to play that's not that. And I remember at the time thinking, yeah, that is a good question. And to my amazement, it turned out yes, very much so, which was really sort of validating of the sort of mature, like there's this especially back then there was this assumption that like games are immature, gamers are immature, and I think that this was kind of one of those early games to suggest like people are interested in all kinds of games.
That was actually a kind of a big moment of realization, I think, during development, where we were very much stressing out about the fact that Flow didn't have the traditional kinds of challenges. The gameplay patterns were just not what people were used to seeing. And then it was about halfway through development, I know, I was just like staying up in bed worrying about it at like 1 a.m. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, and like I think I called Nick. They're just like, no, we don't have to do this.
No, I remember because, initially it was something like, oh, well, we have to make, like the boss at the end, you have to kill him in order to get the end egg token to progress to the next thing. Like that's clearly a challenge that we need to force the player to overcome. And then there was just a certain point in development where John convinced me, he was like, no, like we don't have to force the player to do, that's not what this game is about. And that was totally the right decision to not force any of those
So
decisions.
is that
on the
why
player.
you cut the boss?
No,
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe that's how
That's why the boss never shows
Maybe
up.
that's how we justify it to ourselves. But like even in the first level, there's that big guy at the end, and the idea was, oh well, you have to defeat him to progress. But that was kind of counter to the whole thesis of the game.
Have either of you spun out yet?
I don't know.
Yeah, the jelly has this
The drunk?
maneuver, and then
Each creature has its
oh
own.
wait,
Oh,
oh no,
Hello.
hi friend, hello friend. No, you don't want these pieces.
That's so hard to
What's
control.
happening here is
Nick is being a big jerk, basically.
Nick's creature has
Come on, I would
got-
never do that to you, Nick. Oh wait, no, I have it now.
He's it's revenge.
I
For,
mean,
it's revenge for
come here,
calling
Nick,
me at 1 in the
Nick,
morning.
buddy,
hello,
Nick,
Jeff.
buddy.
Well, they get carried
They
away.
are.
This is
They're
supposed
getting
to be a
carried
commentary
away.
here.
It's a commentary
what's
on
going
them.
on is that one of the player got
All right, back to some
a
sanity
boost
here.
food, which they take
No,
back.
yes.
Okay, so here they got
You're perfectly demonstrating the
Okay.
wisdom of removing griefing from Journey, by the way.
I mean, the thing is, like,
No grief here.
yeah, it's
I'm
just,
feeling very happy.
we're just playing. There's no no real death or penalty. Or
That's
anything.
true. It didn't kick you up to the higher level.
So normally, if you're playing single player and you die, you get kicked up. But in multiplayer, you both have to die for that to happen.
Okay, I sense some frame rate issue here. John, you want to talk about it?
I think, Genova, that this video is being recorded at 30 frames a second anyway. So no one has to know.
Yeah, we definitely were not making full use of the PS3 hardware, which actually was, very common for games released around PS3 launch. I mean, if you compare Uncharted 1 versus 2 versus 3, I mean, every generation of game has significant improvements in terms of hardware utilization. So,
No, it's true.
Yeah.
There were PS2 games coming out while this was being worked on, and I remember being blown away. Were able to run on PS2 because they looked so much better than the early
In flow.
PS2 games.
yeah, I mean,
In flow.
that is just a very common trend amongst new console hardware.
That always has blown me away. That like you can build a machine that you don't know the full potential of. That fascinates me
Yeah,
as a phenomenon that's true throughout all of history.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed the particle here. I actually want to talk about Jonathan Blow.
Okay.
If you
Our good friend Jonathan Blow.
Yes, if you played
Braid.
a game called Braid on the Xbox Live or maybe PSN, you probably heard of Jonathan Blow. And he actually helped us on Flow project. Can you guys talk about what part he worked on?
Yeah, so, well, basically, as we were saying earlier, like we were kind of clueless students who were sort of afraid of the PS3 when we first started working on it. And so the PS3 has these special processors on it called the SPUs, which are what everyone uses nowadays to make the games look as great as they do. But because we were just little kids, we were kind of terrified of using them, and so we tried to get some adult supervision in. And so we hired Jonathan Blow, contracted him to use the SPUs to make our particle system. And so you can actually see, especially in this level, there are all these multicolored particles appearing, plus all this little sort of the crumbs being kicked off when we eat the fish. So yeah, that's a large part of what Jonathan Blow did.
We also contracted another guy, John Alquist, to we actually have a fluid simulation running on the SPUs as well. So the particles are kind of being pushed around as we disturb this fluid sim when we spin. So those are like the two things we tried to do to fully utilize the PS3 resources.
Yeah, and both of those were not done by us.
And obviously in later games, like in Flower, we had the grass simulation, and Journey we had cloth and sand and all kinds of stuff running the SPUs, and so we were making a lot better utilization of the hardware.
Well, and I think it was because of Flow. The game was not maybe always running at the best of frame rates, and the problem was we did not internally in the studio have the capability to fix that because we'd always been getting other people to work on the SPUs, do the hard optimization work.
Right.
And so that was actually a really great learning experience for us, and we kind of vowed afterwards that
Anything important you need to develop in-house, so
Mhm.
you know how it works and how to fix it.
Yeah, and that really worked out for the next two games we did.
So George Weissing, who is our Sony design contact who worked with us,
Sort of
heavily.
our
He was like our mentor guy.
Yeah,
Flow,
he
yeah.
did a lot of work.
Yeah, all these
for-
particles and colors and stuff here he worked on and did a really great job pulling that together. I think the end of this level in particular is very cool.
Yeah, definitely. This is I think has my kind of favorite screenshots.
So
that you can
these
get.
big color particles are actually images of jellyfish that he found and sort of modified in Photoshop, which
Now-
is very
George
cool.
always had very high concept
Yeah,
ideas.
no, I think it's very neat. Very cool inspiration.
I love there was the sound in this was really was sort of crazy for me because I hadn't like for this level in particular this creature. In fact, there was a brief period where these sounds were in Journey also for the slight callback. The
jellyfish.
of the jellyfish was in Journey as a. But I distinctly remember that one. It starts with this like which was my super, because Kelly and I spoke a lot about classical music while working on this, and so that was my super subtle. Oh, nice. That was my
Wait,
super
you
subtle
guys
reference
wait
to
for me.
Petrushka.
I think you can jump in at any time.
Okay, so now, just to kick up the action a little bit, now we have 3 players. I am the blue
Okay.
dolphin fish. So, actually, we have names for each creature. The first level we call it the snake, and the level Nick and John just played is called jelly, and now we call it the dolphin fish. Dolphin fish have, as you can see, multiple. Some of the dolphin fish has multiple life points on them. So if you couldn't kill him the first round, he would dash back to attack you. And that's kind of like, well, I guess John ain't just too good. They just kill them right away.
So the control scheme on this guy is definitely very different from the other creatures. We have more of this dash attack ability.
This is the only, I think, creature in the game. Well, maybe, I don't know, actually. I was gonna say, this is the only one that strikes me as kind of catering to a more aggressive playstyle,
Right.
as opposed to being somewhat more ambiguous and letting the player kind of sort it out.
Yeah, we actually had to do a lot of, there's a lot of sort of auto aiming going on when you dash, where it tries to line up like the best intended direction for you to go versus like what food and creatures are in front of you. And we also did a lot of stuff where food will actually like jump in front of you when you dash at it to make it easy. So it makes you like feel better at the game, or when you dash.
That's the era when people just figure out how
It's the
to.
exact
See, there's,
opposite
like, the-
instinct of most
The food there
actual
kind
food
of
in nature.
it kind of groups up for you as you dash at it, but you know, it feels really good.
A lot of games do that these days. People will just move their head so they can get headshot.
Sweet.
Oh yeah,
Uh-oh.
the rogue is.
First-
Okay, so this is what we call a rogue fish. It has the ability to become stealth, and they also have the ability to paralyze you. So you turn to green when they bite you, so you couldn't attack people during the
Right.
poison.
And you actually
time.
you unlock that creature and get to play it in the next campaign.
There's some poison food right here.
So
I think
don't
I
eat
should
that-
it.
don't eat that
Yeah,
poison
that
food.
looks pretty tasty. It looks apple flavored. Oh.
It's neon flavored. I think musically this is probably my favorite area of the game. It's as dark as it gets. And remember the music. The initial scheme we had was that it was basically cross-fading to different tracks every time you went down, and then it was like, oh crap, there's 80 gigs of audio, and so we had to kind of figure out some selective choices. But at the end of the day, working with Monty and with Paul Fox, I thought we did a really good job at making it pretty deeply adaptive, so that basically, because the sound design and the music are not separate from one another. They are like, in a way, when I'm trying to explain this game to people, I often say that essentially the entire game is a musical instrument, and you're playing the instrument as a byproduct of playing the game.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most basic pieces of feedback we got in, even the Flash version, was every time you ate a food, it would digest down your body. It would play a different note every time it hit a different
Yep.
segment. So, like, the longer you grew, the more satisfying it was, and the more musical it was every time you.
Which was really tricky because I didn't want the music to all just mindlessly drone in the same key. But if you have these things triggering specific sets of notes, and the background music behind that is changing key sort of organically as you progress, really quickly your food starts to get dissonant against the score. And that ended up being one of those things that initially was a mistake, and then I kind of got intrigued by and would intentionally sort of work with, and to try to create a sense of like tension, you know, in an area of the game, and to kind of play with like where certain areas might feel kind of darker than others, and there was a ton of.
Yes.
It's funny. It's in hindsight, this was really quick development time. Like it
Oh,
felt
yeah.
like it felt like a long time for me,
So
even
this-
though it wasn't.
Speaking of that, we spent 7 months developing this, I believe it was.
It was basically like June or something to January or so, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And then, of course, Flower was 2 years and Journey was 3, so this was by far
This was
very, very short.
this was the equivalent of developing
But in
like
terms of
the
total-
Graveyard in Journey.
Work hours, though, I'm not sure if Flow is any less. Flow is a big crunch project, which is the industry term for not going home for 52 days in a row.
Right. Yeah.
Which we were younger then, we could take it.
And now we're old and
Old and tired.
tired.
Not much life left in us.
It was definitely. I think though there's something cool about the fact that because I on the music front I was equally totally felt like I did not know what I was doing. You know, the way you guys were describing yourselves in terms of programming this for this hardware and all that, interactive music was essentially 100% new to me, and I knew it from the standpoint of a gamer, but from composing interactive music was new, and also
This was your first game score that you composed? Flow?
first real. I mean, I had done some student projects before that, and then of course the student version of Flow. But this was by far the biggest undertaking I had yet done at that point. And so it was hands down the deepest I had gone with interactive audio. And
For the first product, it's pretty good, you know.
Oh yeah.
It definitely have this feeling that the sound and music are written together, and everything has, you know, everything you do has a sound integration to the music.
well, that you know, it was funny that I was sort of credited as music and sound design, since the idea was that they not be two different concepts, and it's just the audio of the game, and because you know, unlike Journey and even unlike Flower, there is no like literal real Foley needs. You know, like there's a few basic sounds like when you do your little sprint and things like that, but basically everything is the music, and so it was funny because after it came out and I got a few calls like, oh yeah, I see you do sound design, we're working on it. And I'm like, no, I definitely am not a sound designer.
Well, maybe if the sound is the music.
Yeah, if you're making Flow, then maybe, but I'm pretty sure
Flow
we already
sound
made
design.
Flow. But yeah, it was cool, and it's funny also because a lot of people, I think, like perceived me as this sort of electronics, like new age musician from doing this game, which is funny because this was also the first time I had done electronic music.
Huh.
I mean, to this degree, I mean, I had used it in conjunction with more
Is
traditional.
this the first time you've used a computer working?
This was this was my first. I was literally born on the day this game was started. No, but it's funny, like because I'm like a pretty old school. Like I like to like write music by hand, and you know, and write for like, you know, obviously I
Always
work with
got
orchestras
time,
and
yeah.
things like that, and so this was. I feel like you guys are raiding a village of children right now.
Well, I mean, and especially in this game, because there was no narrative or anything of that sort, the music was so important to conveying any sense of emotion or progression in the game.
Sorry.
Yeah, I remember Kelly and I would talk at length about, we would create these overtures the same as we did on Journey, where we would try to summarize the whole campaign. And like this one, I remember we talked about like being very sneaky and stealthy and kind of, and this ended up being jazzy music, which is weird. It's like jazz electronic music.
Right, because there were no cutscenes or really any sort of narrative progression in terms of what we presented to you visually or gameplay-wise. It was all up to you to create that. I mean, I guess the levels would get darker as you went deeper and more dangerous, but anything beyond that was completely up to you for the audio.
Yeah, and the popularity of the music really surprised me. But I mean, the moment it came out, I started getting emails from people saying, where can I get the soundtrack? Which I'm proud to say, on the several days before us recording this commentary track, it has come out.
That was a short 6 years or something. Not bad.
It's standard.
Standard.
But actually that was really cool because it let me go back and kind of remake the music for soundtrack purposes, because I saw people managed to somehow extract it out of the game, and I saw it show up on some torrents, and I felt bad for anybody that was trying to listen to it.
So this guy here we called the Nurturer Fish, I believe.
That was his name.
And this was one of the few quote-unquote NPC, non-player character creatures we wanted to create. This is kind of like the treasure goblin in Diablo 3, actually, except it's a lot worse.
Well,
It has very feminine eyelashes. on
the
its,
idea was to make the player want to nurture or want to sort of protect that fish, because they keep spitting out food and
Right, like if this fish is, the longer it's alive, the more food it drops for you and stuff. But It's so pathetic looking that everyone just wants to eat it.
Yeah, we
So
saw in
anyways.
playtest like this was the most desirable fish to eat. So we got kind of the totally opposite effect. We were very new to game development.
Yeah, so what was your, because I don't actually have any memory of this, what was the, because playtesting was very intense on Journey, so what was the nature, was there much time for it, or what was the nature?
I think it was equally intense back
Really?
then, and actually even more so because we didn't have a lot of precedent for certain game mechanics that we know work now and whatnot, that we were kind of clueless in terms of how to fix certain problems we were seeing.
Actually, do you remember the first playtest, Nick?
I don't think so.
No, you probably not, because that was one where you and I stayed at the office overnight. We had the 24-hour work. We stayed in overnight because we were trying to get ready for a playtest. We were really excited, and then we'd worked really hard, and then people came in and just couldn't play the game. I think you went home.
These playtests were like brutal.
Yeah.
Check in terms
Rude
of,
awakenings.
yeah, very rude awakening. That's
I
a good
mean,
way to
yeah,
put
and
it.
it just kept happening too. Like we thought, surely we'll be making the game better, but for the longest time, it was just these 8-year-old kids would come in and just would basically be in tears at the end because they can't progress.
I remember there was one playtester in particular. It was this little girl who went straight to the bottom of the first campaign, ate no food the entire way, so she was like, the smallest, weakest possible creature, and repeatedly died to the boss. Like the entire playtest just died over and over and over and over and over.
It was probably after that one that we decided to remove the need to kill the
Yeah,
boss.
and I think that's what actually that's probably what spawned that, because you had to defeat the boss to progress, and she just had no idea what she was doing wrong.
Yeah, and then a game like Flow doesn't exactly have a ton of tutorial text or anything
Right.
like that.
Which was one of the goals of the game, but we didn't quite have the design tools to follow through on that 100%.
So I feel like this fish here, the roguefish that we're playing now, is kind of like the last one that we designed.
I think so.
And I think you can tell just because if you look closely, he's actually like the first 2 fish that you play.
Combined.
Yeah, you got the snake tail and then the jellyfish body.
Right.
That's how we added new mechanics here, added more value for the player.
Well, yeah, I mean, the team is much smaller for the first product. Flow was mostly just the 2 of you, and then later on grown to 5.
Right, it was me, John, Kelly, we hired Martin, we had...
At what point did Martin, because he didn't start on it, right? It was, or
No, Martin came in to do this fish.
This is the first creature
Oh.
that Martin implemented.
because that's all so blurry in my mind as to who was on the team at what point.
Can you talk a little bit about the meter on the players, just so you know how long you can be
Yeah,
stealth?
the idea is you got these like segments right below your head, and as you stealth, they will kind of fade and empty out, so that one of them emptied. And then once they're all empty, you can't go into stealth mode any longer. But I think that amount of nuanced detail is just completely lost on most players, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very interesting to look back at this very first game. It has already a lot of, I would say, DNA and footprint about the future games to come. A lot of kind of foreshadowing of the Flower and Journey. But it's also like there's a lot of rookie mistakes we've made. It's still there. We haven't really played this game for quite a long time. It's really refreshing just to come back to see it.
Yeah, I think the simplicity is definitely very inspiring still for me to see this.
Is there anything that you've seen so far that you just straight up forgot about? That has like shocked you?
Straight up
Because I totally forgot about the Nurturers.
A good idea. That's a good choice.
Like and it's funny, as soon as I saw it, I was like, I've seen that before, but I thought it was like a dream. It didn't strike me
I
as the
think,
most familiar.
One thing we did right in our later games is took the time necessary in order to really fine-tune a lot of these ideas. And on this project, really the goal was to finish this for the launch of the PS3, and so we were just working very hard and didn't have enough time to really polish a lot of the ideas we wanted to implement. So
Although I think that is part of the charm of it. like in hindsight, that's one of those things that, to me, it doesn't actually feel hindered by that, you know, like it doesn't play to me like a game that was just cranked out as fast as possible.
Oh no, definitely not.
But that simplicity is definitely there.
There is another way of looking at it. I mean, people would often compare this game to Pac-Man, which is obviously a fairly simple game, and so you can still say, well, we spent 7.5 months making Pac-Man. So there's still quite a lot you can do there.
That's better than comparing it to Spore.
What I do like to see is actually, the amount of attention put into the music, the design, the visual to bring a unique feel in each level, and that has been executed quite well. We kind of kicked it up a level during Flower, but even in Flow, I start to see the connections, between our game. The fact the different creatures designed to evoke different feeling when you're playing, it's actually quite well done. So for example, the roguefish is supposed to feel, sneaky, kind of almost like a, Metal Gear Solid kind of game. And now this next one that they're going to play, we call it Shark, a very predator fish, and you can see how their behavior is very different. Whenever they are sensing there's a potential prey nearby, their body will go red automatically. And the way,
just like an auto attack. Basically.
Yeah, the way they tear other creature apart is very vicious.
And I think the music is definitely very jarring, and maybe you can talk a little, or the sound effects rather. Maybe talk a little bit about that, Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I spent, again, having never done sound design before this project, which is, I'm sure, a fact that I did not want Sony to know about while I was working on it. It was really cool, actually. It was really sort of liberating to say, okay, like, I'd get the instructions from you guys, like, okay, we're doing kind of this hunter shark area, we want kind of like, I'd get these adjectives. It was very cool because there was no like temp sound in the game as a placeholder. There wouldn't be like just fully from the library or something acting as a thing. It would just not make noise until I sent something in. And so I would sit there and I would take like a random instrument, and then I would cut off the sound of this, the sound beginning, and then I'd flip it backwards, and then I'd do just like try all these processes until it started to sound like whatever. Like in this case, you would say, it should have kind of a light on its feet, aggressive quality, something that's dangerous, but in a very kind of swift way. And initially I'd think I don't have any idea how to do that, and would just start playing around and it was fun. And my God, I remember at one point I put them all in my iTunes just to see. I think there was something like 4,000 individual sounds that I created. And I don't know how many of those are in the game, but a lot. I mean, it was crazy. It was really stimulating as a composer to figure out like how do you translate like a musical idea into a quarter of a second of quote music. And it was really fun. Later on, I did the orchestral adaptation of this stuff. That trying to figure out a way to duplicate that with actual acoustic instruments live, and to try to simulate the kind of semi-randomness of it in game was really a lot of fun. When they recently played that piece at the Smithsonian for the exhibit, and those musicians had never played music like that before, and they initially all kind of were scratching their head. But they did a good job. It really came off. It was really cool to see that. It was a very surreal moment, actually, to be standing in the Smithsonian and be like, so something that started as like a college student is here now. It was very crazy to think about.
So one of the, another foundational principle that we've kind of built on since Flow is this idea of graphics and visuals being very important to the player's experience. And so during Flow, we had this phrase glow theory. So we had flow theory, which was how the gameplay should be designed, and then we had glow theory, which was how the visuals should be designed.
Which is basically you should add as much glow as possible. That's glow theory.
The more glow, the better. Like every piece of feedback needs more glow.
And we've basically just been just refining our glow technology ever since Flow.
Whose
So-
job was that? Like these background kind of misting clouds. Who?
Well, I was the lead glow engineer.
Okay, got
But
it.
the background is a lot of that's is George Weissing,
Yeah.
who is our design mentor
Yeah.
from Sony.
Yep.
So designer who have the desire to make art has an opportunity to put them here.
It's just like piranhas swarming over the
Yeah,
I think
and
this is
helpless.
This is maybe my favorite level of the entire game. I think it conveys the sense of this creature the best. You know, I
Just
currently have
devouring
no
ruthlessly.
idea who anyone is. Yeah, I think that's the point. It's just utter chaos, hunger.
Yeah,
It's about
definitely.
lunchtime now.
Yeah.
Well, in the original, one of the
cares if it
creatures,
close?
one of the creatures that was, because you end up down in like this dark kind of black space, and that's sort of the way the first campaign ends. And as I recall, at one point or another, there was going to be a creature after that was almost like the snake level backwards. That was like, because I wrote a whole thing of music for it that we put out on the soundtrack as a bonus that was called The Homecoming.
Right.
That was like, and I don't even remember what the
Yeah.
creature design was.
It was supposed to be like a mixture of all the levels you had played through, I think, as kind of like a
Right.
final last hurrah kind of level.
Yeah, and it was super like warm and
Correct.
beautiful, and
Yeah, it was gonna be like champagne colored or something like that. For the whole thing, yeah. But we didn't have time to follow through with that. So. Yeah.
This is a very sad level where you get to eat your babies.
part of the subtle commentary that is this game.
Yeah, the whole idea of going down and deeper and darker territory, I think, was very much inspired by Motherload, which was one of my favorite Flash games at the time.
Oh, man.
Like that feeling of venturing into dangerous, dark territory was very exciting.
And only the very dedicated Flow players will ever get to meet Mr. Natas. Alright, this is a rainbow level. Good job, George.
Yeah.
I always love the way that
Cool.
they just kind of swim off screen too. That's nice.
I mean, George did a lot of cool stuff where
Seamless.
like the visibility of the particles is based on their velocity, so as you kick them up, they become more visible, and a lot of good feedback for moving around through the particles,
Alright.
through glow theory.
So here's the finale.
Edible credits.
It would be wrong, but I actually think this is probably the most beautiful level, with all the designs around the names. Here
This
we are.
level. Oh, hello.
There's our USC.
So this is the team who did the actual PlayStation 3. House Fei was the art director. And then next one is actually the people who helped us building the game. Jonathan Blow, John Alquist, and the other, artist contractors who come in later.
Todd Fermansky was a programming contractor who also became the name of our shared data server for
For
many,
quite
many
a while,
years.
yeah. He lived on past his tenure in that game company.
This level
Server.
actually caused quite a lot of trouble for us because we had to have all the textures for these names.
You just ate Randall.
And
By the way, Randall Lowe, the producer of from Sony, is with us at the recording.
Howdy, everyone.
There was Randall's commentary. I felt very proud, by the way, to have my own tier. That was a high moment in my life.
Yeah, from that point, I think we always treat the music as something very, very important. Well, who gets all these tales? That's
I think that's me.
person.
I'm not sure why exactly.
I think
You're hogging your share
the
of
rest of
credits.
us
Yeah.
I think you're all
are,
feeding me.
But pretty much in the
we're the wrong fish for this level.
I purposely switched it because I don't think anyone did that through the whole thing.
Interesting.
actually with us is also community manager Aaron Gromish. And
Amish Gromish.
can you find yourself in this?
Yeah, I was like earlier, but like whoever is the fish, like the long-tailed fish, the credit fish.
Okay. It was
So-
back
so
in a
re-
special
So I got
sense.
it.
Rewind.
I think
the complete flow experience.
Whoa.
Glowy.
Glow, right? Sorry.
Yeah, so I guess this is, originally you guys have a plan to do a final level that covers all the mechanics, but this has become the final level.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can see the tradition of TGC games where the last is always kind of like a recap and a conclusion of everything else. And that's it.
Yeah.
The flow game.
Thanks for watching, guys.